Just remove this section. Cool car, bro. Hi, I am Nick D Clements, and I used to make stuff like this.
Make it look like a big piece of crap. Who cares?
I need a couple bulletin boards for an upcoming project, and I wasn't really able to find any quite the size that I wanted. At least not ones that I could go out to the store and get. Walmart had a few around this size that would have worked if they weren't totally trashed. So as I see it, I have a few options. One, I could just get a much larger bulletin board and reduce it down to the size that I want, which isn't a bad idea. In fact, you can pretty much take any picture frame and with a relative amount of ease, reduce it in size. However, in this case, the bulletin board is basically twice the size that I need. So I'd pretty much have to buy 2 of them to get the 2 that I need. And then I'd basically have a full bulletin board that's just missing some parts going to waste. Now, of course, I could find something to do with it eventually, but in this case, it's pretty much better if you're only reducing it by a few inches. Say you have an 8x8 image, but an 8x10 frame. Now, of course, you could mat it, or we could just convert this into a square frame. And in that case, there's only a couple inches of material that's going to waste. So let's do that. Now this is just a cheap dollar store frame, so dismantling it is going to be quite easy. A more expensive frame is probably going to have fancier joinery, but it should work all the same. So basically all we're really looking to do is just removing this section from the frame. And again, with these dollar store frames, it's actually quite easy to get them apart. I'm just going to wiggle them, and there's pretty much just a tiny little metal shim holding them together. I'm going to do my best to do this without breaking it. Again, if this was a nicer frame or if it was glued, we could just cut through it. They do have these little metal inserts, which ideally you wouldn't want to run through a saw blade, but it is quite thin and it really wouldn't do too much damage. But in this case, we can pretty much just pull it apart. So I'll set that aside, and then I'll make a mark. So I want to cut on a 45 right around there. Now I could go out to my shop in the cold and use the miter saw or the table saw, but instead I have a mini table saw. This adorable looking thing is something I picked up at Harbor Freight, and it has been surprisingly useful. Now, it comes with a little miter gauge, which is pretty useless, but I 3D printed a mini sled for my mini table saw, which gives it a surprising amount of precision. I also made a miter sled, which is going to be perfect for this. Now, just because it's tiny doesn't mean that it's any safer than a full-size table saw. In fact, it's probably more dangerous. It's actually kind of terrifying. Now, it does come with this safety guide, which attaches on the back, but you can't really use it with my sleds, so... Now, you certainly don't need a mini table saw sled or a full-size table saw or any power tools to do this frame modification. A simple, inexpensive miter box will work just fine. In fact, it'll probably work better, but this is just fun. Actually made a very clean cut. But let's see how we fare with just the inexpensive miter box. I'm gonna use the portion I cut off to mark out where I want to cut off on the other side. And that worked just as well, maybe just a bit of feathering, but we can certainly take care of that, just showing there's always many ways to do something. And now it's just a matter of reattaching the fourth side. Now I could try and reuse these metal splines, but I'm just going to glue it. And there's our modified frame. It really is that easy. You just remove the amount of frame that you don't need, cut those new miters, and put it back together. Now, yes, there is one more step. Our glass is now too big for the frame, and while there is absolutely an art to cutting glass, a simple straight cut, just removing a few inches, that's definitely something anybody can do. I just have a piece of floor foam that I'm going to work on, and I cut the sample image to the size of my frame so I know how small to cut my glass. And I'm going to just set my glass on top of that. And then you will want some kind of straight edge. And finally, you just need a glass cutter. You can get these at any home center and they're very inexpensive. Now, I'm not an expert in cutting glass by any means, but the best advice I can give is firm but consistent pressure. You drag the cutter across the glass one time. You can really only do it once. You can't go back and score it multiple times if you didn't cut it deep enough. You really only get one chance, one opportunity to do it right. You score it, you break it, or you break it. And I've also found that pushing away from me gives me a lot more control and better results than I get if I pull towards me. And there we go. It's a pretty clean cut. With any luck, that'll fit into our newly modified frame. Nice. There we go. A square frame for our square picture. I think that came out great. And again, relatively easy to do. It's just a cool technique, and you don't have to settle for the size of the frame that you can find. If you like the frame, but you wish it was a different size, just make it a different size. Now again, this was all just a side quest. As I said, this option really isn't going to help me with my bulletin board issue. So let's look at another option. Now just pausing for a brief moment. I don't know how much I showed, if I showed any, but the glass cutting segment didn't go nearly as smoothly as I would have hoped. As you can see here, I made a few mistakes. I just want to include this just to let you know, if it doesn't go smoothly for you the first few times you try, don't get discouraged. Just keep trying and you'll figure out what you need to do to make it work. You're probably going to make mistakes, and that's okay. And best to just practice on some cheap dollar store glass. One, because if you break it, it's just a couple bucks and you're not out too much money. But also, this is actually harder to cut, at least in my opinion. It's very thin and very brittle. So if you can master cutting this, when you move up to cutting something a bit thicker and a bit more expensive, you're probably going to be able to cut pretty much anything really well. But again, I don't want to hide anything from you. I'm not perfect, not at all. So here is my pile of shame. So returning to my bulletin board issue, if resizing the frame isn't an option, what about just making a new frame? I could buy the double-sized bulletin board, cut it in half, rip off the frame, and just put on a new one. But that is a bit of extra work, and I don't really want to make a new frame. So, I mean, if you haven't figured it out by now, I just bought some frames of the size of bulletin board that I would like, and I'm just going to put a bulletin board in it. That's straightforward, really. However, instead of just buying a giant bulletin board, ripping off the frame and shoving it into a different frame, I went ahead and just got the bulletin board. This is a foam board with a layer of bulletin on the front. And in this case, this was cheaper than buying the full-size bulletin board and ripping off the frame. Maybe you can find a cheap bulletin board and just get rid of the frame and put it in your own frame, or you can go this route. I mean, either one, it's a good option. This, I just don't have to dismantle it. I can just get straight to work. Or you could even just go frameless. You could just cut it out of the frame and say, who needs a frame? That's how they try and sell these. You're just supposed to kind of put these on the wall, 4 up, and it's supposed to be like a super minimalist bulletin board. And I mean, that's certainly an option. Or you can buy these, buy a dollar store frame and throw it in, trim it up a bit. I don't know. I think I certainly like framing it. I think frames just make it look more finished, but just no frame is certainly an option too. But for what I'm making, I'd like a frame, so that's the way I'm gonna go. Now, before I cut this down and throw it in my frames, I actually want to do like a dollar store DIY version of this whole idea. The Dollar Tree sells sheets of self-adhesive cork, and we can put that on some Dollar Tree foam core and put it all in a Dollar Tree frame, making a $3.75 custom DIY corkboard, bulletin board, which I think is really cool, and I want to try it out. So I cut a couple sheets of foam core the same size as the adhesive cork, and I'm actually going to glue these together. That way they're thick enough for a push pin to go through and not pop out the back. And I'm just going to glue them together with a little bit of spray adhesive. Peel this off. That is really sticky. Myself some room on either side. Cool. It's also a great upcycling project. If you have a frame, maybe the glass broke and this is just lying around doing nothing, just throw in a cork panel and make a little bulletin board. There we go, super easy dollar store DIY bulletin board. That's really cool. That works great. I really like that. That's super cool. And you can use any frame you want. That's really cool. You can totally customize it to your look and size. Now there's one more thing I want to try in this vein of experimenting. We saw how easy it was to reduce the size of a frame, but what about making it bigger? So I want to see if we can maybe take 2 frames and put them together. So obviously there'll be some sort of seam, so different frames will probably look better or worse. This frame has a raised wood grain in it, so you're definitely gonna see the seam. If you went with something smooth, you could probably smooth it over and maybe even paint it to hide the seam pretty well. But I'm still gonna give it a go. Here's our bonus piece of glass, since we won't need it for the cork board, so you can use it for practicing your glass cutting on. Now, depending on how thick the frame is, and especially if it's a nicer frame, you'd probably want to do what's called a scarf joint. It's where you actually cut on a 45-degree angle this way. It's actually how you combine 2 pieces of molding. But in this case, I'm just going to do 2 straight cuts and just butt join it together. So actually easier than when we reduce the size of the frame, because we don't have to worry about any miters. That could actually be cool. If we like cut it here and here and made like a figure 8 frame. I almost want to do that, but I'm just going to stick with my original plan and make a bulletin board like this. Get my mini table saw out one more time. And do the same thing to this one. Well, looks like I'm doing the last one by hand because my mini table saw might have bit the oh, there we go. I don't think it likes being turned on and off a bunch of times. Cool, that worked great. Now I just got to put these together. That's honestly not that bad. Even this one with the wood grain, you could just kind of continue carving it in a bit, sand it up, add a new thing of paint. That would look great. But even as is, I don't even really hate that seam. That's really cool. So there we go. We can reduce the size of the frame or put two frames together to make an even larger one. And again, you can cut this using just a very inexpensive miter box and handsaw. There's no need to involve fancy power tools. It's just fun. With any luck, we can get two pieces out of that piece. Cool. Get the spray adhesive out one more time. Sandwich those together. And let's put on our cork. Now, of course, these aren't big enough, so we're gonna have to use two. And again, we'll probably have a seam in the middle. They are quite a weird size, 11.75 by 7.75. What is that size? What if, I mean, not 8.5 by 11 or 8 by 10, just, I don't know. It's a weird widescreen format. And for $1.25, these are really nice adhesive sheets of cork. I mean, they're thin, but they're definitely quality and they're super sticky. Whatever you put this on, they're not peeling off. Like I said, once it's stuck, it's stuck. Slightly forgiving. There we go. That seam ain't that bad. It's not too bad. Looks fine. That's pretty cool. Now this one is what? A $6.25 bulletin board? You could probably buy a $6 one, probably even bigger one. But that's still really cool. It's fun. Because again, you can pick the frame, you can make it whatever size you want. Yeah, those seams don't look bad at all. I really like this. This is really cool. Neat. All right, well, on to the main event. So I got my big sheet of cork board. I just need to cut it down to size to fit in my 13 by 19 frames, and I can use the backer board from those frames as my cutting guide. I want to make sure I have a nice sharp knife. There we go. This thing's awesome, by the way. A nice clean cut. And then just cut to width, length, height, I don't know, the other dimension. Perfect. That's really nice. Yeah, I mean, just the frame, doesn't that make it look so much nicer than just a plain bulletin board? Again, if that's the aesthetic you're going for, just no frame, minimalist, sure, but that just looks really nice. That's just such a cool, the bulletin board, the exact size that I'm looking for. And I was able to pick out the frame, and it's a very nice thin frame, so it gives almost the same effect. It's just, that's cool. I dig this. Let's do it one more time. And another one. Well, there you go, 2 totally custom bulletin boards for a future project. Check back in a couple weeks to see what they are for. But these are awesome. I am super happy with them. Again, there's a whole bunch of ways you can go about making them. You could just rip apart an old bulletin board. You could rip apart a new bulletin board. You could buy just the bulletin board and put it in a frame. You could even use just the foam core. It probably wouldn't work as well as bulletin because cork kind of has a self-healing property, but if you're not going to be putting pins and pulling them out frequently, that would work just fine, and that's definitely a cheap option. But honestly, any way you want to go about it, I just think the concept itself of just choosing your own frame and making them your own size is just really cool. Of course, you could make the entire frame yourself too and make it completely custom, but that just saves a massive step in just being able to buy a frame off the shelf and then throw the cork into it. I just think it's a really cool concept. Everything we did today is really cool. I absolutely love the Dollar Tree cork boards, especially this $3 one. I just think that's really cool. You just pick out whatever frame you like, grab a sheet of the foam core, and grab that self-adhesive cork board. Those are just so cool. There's so many things that you could do with this little 8x10 or even smaller cork board. And then again, being able to resize picture frames is just a super cool trick and kind of the hacky version of making it bigger. But still, that worked out a lot better than I was expecting. So, on guard. They're a set of little weapon push pins. Wow. But my sincere thank you for watching. Once again, I am Nick D Clements. If you're wondering, Nick is short for Nicholas, and the D stands for decor, studio decor. Not sponsored, they're just the cheapest frames Michael's had. Anyway, I'm off to make something else. You get pretty much one shot. And I blew my shot. Damn it. God damn. I'm running out of glass.